Hello and welcome to discussion today. I'm Tina Jha. The United States and Iran have taken a first step towards reviving the 2015 nuclear deal following a full day of indirect diplomatic meetings in Vienna, Austria on Tuesday. The European Union brokered Iran nuclear talks in Vienna is being attended by diplomats from the UK, China, France, Germany, Russia and Tehran. Special Envoy Robert Malley is leading the US in the indirect talks with Iran. The talks will focus on ways to revive the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that former US President Donald Trump unilaterally abandoned in May 2018. Now, under the 2015 nuclear deal, Iran had agreed to greatly limit its nuclear program through 2025. However, Donald Trump had argued back then that this gave the Iranians a pathway to nuclear weapons. Now, after Tuesday, the US State Department termed it a broad step forward towards reviving the talks. However, the State Department spokesperson Ned Price added that the US expects the indirect talks with Iran on its nuclear program to be difficult and also a long process ahead. So on this edition of discussion today, we will analyze the significance of the revival of nuclear talks between the US and Iran, the major hurdles that still remain, and the impact of these developments on India. Joining me for this on the program today are two very special guests. Let me first introduce them to you. I have with me on discussion today former Ambassador Dilip Sinha. Welcome to the show, sir. And Mr. W.S.H. Awad, he is West Asia expert. Welcome to the program, sir. Ambassador, let me begin the program with your views on how significant is this move to revive the 2015 nuclear talks between the US and Iran?
It is significant for both countries. President Biden wants to show that he is bringing the US back into international diplomacy. He is overcoming the isolationism of President Trump and perhaps some of the irrationality that had been brought in by him in America's foreign policy. So President Biden wants to be more engaged in the world, and he feels that this is one of the areas where he can undo some of the damage that had been done by President Trump's policies and show a certain degree of engagement. In Iran, you have elections coming up in June, and President Rouhani will not be contesting because he has finished his 2 mandatory terms. So he'd like to leave with a certain legacy of having resolved this problem. So he'd like to leave behind a success rather than to go down as a president who went through the whole period of sanctions. Yes. So from both countries' points of view, for both leaders, it is an important step where both of them would like to show some degree of success.
Okay, Mr. Awad, your thoughts on how positive a step it is going to be both for Washington and Tehran, considering the fact that these are indirect talks into the process?
Well, I think, as Ambassador have said, this is actually the first steps toward normalization of the relation and bringing back the United States into the international arena, where the United States has to prove that it can be part of the peace and security and global peace and security, and not only as a unilateral power, because it was a 2015 deal that it has been done along with the American who agreed 5+1 and the European and the international agreement, where Mr. Trump pulled out of this agreement only because he wanted to oppose whatever President Obama have done and erase the era of Obama. And I think the American has no logic in going and putting conditions on the deal right now, because it was President Biden who promised during his campaign that he will come back to the deal. And in fact, if the United States can come back to WTO and it can come back to WHO and also to the international organization, why not to an international agreement that have been already agreed upon? So to put any sort of conditions on the issues, actually it is complicating the issue rather than helping, because here you have the loss of the trust of the United States as a peace broker, a loss of trust of the United States internationally if they are unable to honor their own deal with the international community. So I think Biden is trying to find a face-saving formula to come back into this deal without showing to the American Congress and to the American people that he has compromised on the American national interest. But everybody knows, including the European, as you know, they have already agreed that this agreement with Iran will deny Iran any nuclear weapon in the future. And in fact, that is the experts also from the International Atomic Agency, which have already stated that this will make it impossible for Iran to go nuclear. So therefore, why you wanted to go we don't want to abide by the agreement already been signed upon. This is one of the issues. And I think the discussion and the extension of the discussion in Vienna and the bilateral meetings of the United States with different stakeholders have shown that there is a keen interest of bringing the United States back into this agreement and ensuring that Iran does not go the hardline way, because as Iran have said earlier, they are not willing also to trust the American, neither North Korea, nor Iraq, nor Libya. They will not go the Libyan or the Iraqi way. So the United States have to recognize this is a very important piece of agreement, and it will bring stability to the region rather than make it more unstable. Back to you, Tina.
Okay, Ambassador, so it's more of a face-saving effort by the United States. A lot of analysts have also been suggesting that. And also the fact that Donald Trump actually walked out of the deal unilaterally, saying it is favoring the Iranians in a bigger way. And now the new administration getting back to the talks table, how much of it weakens the United States' stand?
The deal had certain weaknesses, which is one of the reasons why it had been criticized by some countries, including Saudi Arabia, which took a certain cautious stand on it. But nevertheless, it was an agreement reached. And once an agreement is reached, there are always pluses and minuses in an agreement, and it has to be honored. That's how international relations run. Now, what the US has to understand, of course, understands, is that the global situation has changed considerably. And you have moved from a unipolar world to what is now more or less a bipolar world, where you have on the one side China, which is the second largest economic power, and you have Russia, which is a very strong military power, which are both supporting Iran. So, and Iran has taken a very tough stand. So the moment the US withdrew from the deal, Iran started enriching uranium beyond the agreement. So the violation took place from the Iranian side as well, which in a way makes it very difficult for the US, because Iran now has the support of China, and you've seen this new deal that's been signed by Iran with China, $400 billion. So Iran can go ahead and have good relations with both Russia and China, as a result of which the US will be then left in a situation where Iran will be developing enriching its nuclear facilities, potentially moving towards a nuclear weapon. And economically, despite the sanctions being imposed by the US and Europe, it will not feel that, because China is itself a major economic power. So the US is trying to bring itself back into the region where Iran is a very important player, and where US has important interests, apart from its close ally, Israel and Saudi Arabia. So the US would like to come back in this region, become a player in this region, and try and bring itself back into the role of being a factor of peace and stability in the region, which I think from our point of view also is a very positive development.
Okay, Ambassador, when you say global considerations have changed considerably over the years, back in 2015, there were several stakeholders into the deal. Where do they stand as on date? Particularly if you talk about Russia and China, has there been a change in their stance as far as the nuclear deal is concerned?
In the last 6 years, China has emerged as a major economic power, and China has also become an expansionist power, where it is looking for expanding its economic interests all across the globe. It has already, as I said, signed this major deal with Iran. It has linked up with Iran through a railway line network. It has strengthened its relations with Central Asia, and is now using Central Asia as a springboard for entering into Iran. Mr. Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, went across and toured the entire Middle East region very recently. So China is positioning itself as a major player in this region. And it is in the US interest to ensure that it comes back into this region also as a player, where it is not a partisan player, but that all the parties in the region, including Iran, are able to talk to and deal with the US. So it is the situation where the US can act as a factor of peace rather than as a partisan power.
Okay. Mr. Awad, coming back to you on the hurdles that these talks could face. Obviously, the larger aim is to balance both the concerns as well as interests of both Washington and Tehran. But what are the hurdles that could come in the way?
Well, I think the commonality between the United States and Iran is very strong in the region. In fact, if the United States, apart from Israel, it can find lots of commonality with Iran in the interest of keeping the Persian Gulf stable and the American money flowing, and also the global trade is on. Because here you can see Iran is a very geopolitically located, very important in the north-south corridors, in the pipelines which could come from Europe into Eurasia, into China, into India, where it will play a major role in any future plan of the connectivity. Having said that, I would say also that the United States only trying to complicate the issue because of the Israeli interest, for sure. Ambassador mentioned it, and I wanted to stress on this point. The only complication and the only objection that the United States is trying to put a hurdle on this is the ballistic missile capability of Iran, which is a very strong and can reach and can hit even any part of Israel, because nobody talk of Israeli nuclear arsenal, but only they are talking of Iranian ambition to have a nuclear, though they don't have it yet, but they're talking of ambitious Iran of having a nuclear weapon. But Israel also sees lots of concern because they think that Iran have expanded into this part. They have been supporting resistance forces against its occupation. So therefore, they know that exactly that they can sabotage this deal. And as long as the Israeli lobby apply pressure on the United States, they will continue to put this hurdle on the way of not signing or coming back to this agreement. But I think the Iranians have taken a very strong and firm stand, and the European knows very well. Actually, the violation of the agreement was not done by the Iranian at all. Even if they have gone into enrichment more than 20% of the uranium, you can go clearly to the articles of the agreement. If someone pull out of the agreement, that will give the other party the ability to also move away from the agreement and go back into their status quo on their original stand. So I think the European understood this, and that is why they are putting pressure on the United States. If the United States only keep away, that they are thinking that Iran is expanding its arm in Yemen, in Syria, in Libya, in Lebanon, in Palestine, all these in Iraq, all these issues, Americans understand that if they solve the problem with the Iranian, definitely they will come back to the table and they will come back to the investment. But I think the changing game plan now has happened, that the Iranian went for a 25 years deal with the Chinese. Yes, they have already presented the Chinese with a $400 billion deal. That is, the American companies are losing, and there is a pressure on the American administration currently by the giant American companies that we are losing Iran because of our interest in the region is being sabotaged, and therefore American recession's influence in the region is already being witnessed, and that vacuum is being filled by the Chinese and by the Russian, and India is moving now in the direction of getting access through Iran into the CIS country through Afghanistan. So all these fall in the interest of the region. The United States had no option but to come back to the table and remove those hurdles which they are trying to put it on the table of the Iranian nuclear capability and curbing the Iranian ballistic missile program. So I think these are the issues. Only rest of the issues like opening the market and inviting the American companies and investments and improving their infrastructure of banking systems and the malpractice and misgovernance, all these issues will come, of course, on handy, because the United States, I don't see the United States, honestly speaking, as a witness to the region and being watching the American involvement in the region. It's a clear indication that seriously they are not a peace broker. Only the problem here is that the American administration changed, and we have now the Democrat back in power, where we are showing that they're managing the crisis, they are not solving the crisis. That is their style of dealing with the international diplomacy. And now they wanted to create more trouble in the region rather than helping in solving the problem. And I think they are looking for more of a trouble with Iran. But because of the Iranian, now they are unable to bring them back to the table as putting the stick and carrot policy which they have been carrying away, and their partners, the European partners, are moving away from the American position, particularly with this issue with Iran. I think they are recognizing that if they do not come back, Iran definitely will go in nuclear, no matter what may be trying. And therefore, they cannot see Iran go the North Korean way, or they can be more pressure on the United States to come back, and those hurdles should be removed.
Okay, Ambassador. So for the talks to progress, and as Mr. Awad suggests, with the United States not having much option ahead, do you see Washington lifting the sanctions that it has imposed on Iran going forward?
You see, now apart from the nuclear program that Iran had, which was a major concern for the US, there was a few other concerns as well, which is Iran's involvement in the region, in the war in Yemen, in Syria, and of course, other activities related to Israel. So that also is a major concern of the US. And while Donald Trump wanted to resolve this matter by confronting Iran, President Biden's policy is to try and see if he can start a dialogue with Iran. Of course, there's this issue of who will take the first move. And that's why EU's mediation has been accepted. And what we are having is parallel talks mediated by the EU. If we can make progress, they can make progress in this, that will be enable the US and Iran to start talking directly and perhaps get over this hesitation that both sides have. But as far as the concerns are there, the US has certain concerns regarding regional stability as well because of Iran's policies in the region. And that's one of the reasons that it's not just Israel, there's also Saudi Arabia, and there are certain other countries also which are concerned about Iran's policies. So the US also has to look at that before it gets into any direct talks with Iran and lifts sanctions.
Okay, Mr. Awad, how much of a barrier is this small window of opportunity? Because the elections are due in Iran in June, and we have like less than 2 months. So how are both sides going to utilize this time? Because after the presidential elections, who knows what is in store for the nuclear talks to progress, and whether they will at all after these election results are declared?
Well, definitely it will harden the Iranian position if the people join and take over the presidency or the parliament in Iran, for sure. But I'm also aware that the public opinion in Iran, irrespective of who is in power, already agrees that this deal is a national interest of Iran, and therefore they have to stick to it. They have to keep firm their position, and that is why the United States will find it very difficult to break Iran or to break Iran from within. I am always of the opinion that the United States will come back to the Iranian, no matter what it may be, because they know the value of Iran. We know that they have been the watchdog of the American interests prior to the Iranian Revolution. You know, until 1979, it was Iran who was guarding the American interests in the region, who were the 12th largest power in the world by the American. It was the American, in fact, and the French who have already built the nuclear plant for Iran. So therefore, if you were the one who were building those nuclear plant and suddenly you change of your interest because Iranian wanted to a revolution and they changed the embassy of Israel into embassy of Palestine in Tehran, and then you recognize that your interest becomes sabotaged, and now you see that it is because of this you are anti-Iranian policy. It doesn't work in the international politics anymore. You need to recognize that Iran is a cultural, is a civilized country, and it is strong enough to stand on its own despite the American sanction. It is since 1979, the sanction is on Iran by the Americans. What they have done, they have improved their position. They have strengthened their capability, industrial also. They are also manufacturing weapons in Iran. They are also exporting. So the American and the European realize that the sanction does not work anymore. Sanction only, it is a terror tool used by certain countries to destroy and sabotage the stability inside the country. But I think that tool is no more can be used because it's only double the black market money. That's all. And you can get all your weapons. You remember during the Iraqi, Iranian war, in the first war, Gulf War, it was the Israeli and the American who sold the spare parts to Iran in Iran Gate. And they were helping the Contras in Nicaragua and all with the money they have made profit out of it with the CIA. So therefore, it's the interest. It's nothing to do with ideology, with the American that they are worried about, their interest being sabotaged because American company are losing. That is what the only issue here. The conflict of interest will remain a major issue. Iran has fought with Iraq. American helped Iraqi Saddam Hussein. They give the Iranian Iraq on a golden platter. They went into Syria. They did the similar fashion. They went into Libya. They have taken it from the American have taken Libya. So where Iran influence has been in the region, it is because of the American involvement in this region. It's not because otherwise, because first Gulf War, it was the American who supported Saddam Hussein, along with the European, along with the GCC. So where Iran comes, I don't see from 300 years ago that Iranian have really been involved in any direct war with any country neighboring it. So therefore, the ultimate goal of the American and the West, in fact, is to drag Iran into the Sunni-Shia conflict with the majority Sunni countries led by Saudi Arabia against Iran, which we consider the arch of resistance or axis we have created from Syria, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon and Palestine, against an American axis which has been created by Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and also Egypt into the Iranians. So they want us to forget that there is an Israeli occupation of Palestine, and our real enemy is Iran and is not Israel. So therefore, there is a change of plan, but there is also, it is a part of the global pictures developing, Tina, in the region. We are part of the international new order, and we are living in a very anarchic world now. And I think Ambassador will agree with me, as he said at the beginning, that we are in a multipolar world. India is emerging, Russia is emerging, BRICS is taking part. So United States is no more the unipolar. So we need to reshape this international new world order to find a place for a small power, regional power, to take their own part in this part. So I think in overall pictures, America and Iran will come back together if the Israelis put pressure on the United States and tell them, as they have told him during the Shah visit to America, that the Shah was a friend of Israel and receive him at the White House. I think they will do the same when they solve the problem with the Iranians.
Okay, Ambassador. So I think the complexities, the concerns, the hurdles going forward are going to be many. And perhaps the United States acknowledges that. That explains their statement that it is going to be a long and difficult process ahead. So for those currently meeting in Vienna, what are the options ahead? What is the potential pathway forward?
The most difficult task is for the EU diplomats who are shuttling between the two US and Iranian delegations, carrying messages across. The next round of talks, I believe, is on Friday.
Yes.
So it's a difficult task for them. The EU is very keen to bring Iran and the US together, to revive the deal, and to enable the US to come back as a player in this region, and also to bring Iran out of its shell. Number one, because of the sanctions, and also because of the leaning that Iran is having towards China and Russia, which from the EU's point of view is not a good thing, nor is it has from the US point of view. But it's good that you have a president like President Biden in office in the US, because he, being a multilateralist, a person who works closely with his allies, understands global affairs, and does not follow a confrontationist policy, is a good sign of the possibility of success, at least some baby steps being taken in Vienna to move towards a greater agreement in the future.
Okay, Mr. Awad, one final comment from you on what is the potential pathway forward for the talks to proceed so that balance and interests of both Washington and Tehran are taken care of?
I think the best way is the United States, as they have agreed, and I started my discussion, come back to the agreement, adhere to the commitment you have made to this international agreement, and let every party come back also to the status quo they have developed, and let the sanction be left on the country, and things move forward. Because there are lots of potential of investment for all the country. Now we are suffering from a COVID-19 pandemic, which have already affected most of the economy or global economy. And I think coming back to the agreement without any condition is the best way out of the current blockage.
All right. So with that, I'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of Discussion Today. Thank you once again to both my guests for joining me on the program and sharing your perspective with us and our viewers. Pleasure having you on the show. So that's it from us on Discussion Today. Just in case you missed the television broadcast of our program, let me remind my viewers that you can also catch it on YouTube and also on Twitter, and you can get back to us with your feedback and suggestions. Also, a gentle reminder to all those watching our program, in the wake of rapid surge in cases of COVID-19, do continue to maintain COVID-appropriate behavior. Wear masks, wash your hands and face regularly, and maintain physical distancing whenever you step outside. These are simple precautions that we must take in order to defeat the pandemic. Take care of yourselves and your families. Thank you for your time.